A quiet afternoon took a shocking turn when a routine traffic stop spiraled into chaos. A black woman, just trying to get home, found herself facing the unwarranted aggression of a police officer. What should have been a straightforward interaction quickly became something far more disturbing. But what this officer didn't know was that her husband, an FBI agent, was watching everything unfold. As the situation escalated, the woman stood her ground, determined not to let injustice go unchecked. Meanwhile, her husband quietly gathered evidence, uncovering not just the officer's abuse of power in this moment, but a trail of shocking crimes that would soon come to light. This is a story about courage, accountability, and the fight for justice. Stay tuned to find out how this determined couple turned the tables and exposed the truth, leaving everyone stunned. What happens next will leave you speechless. The officer's voice was sharp, his tone dripping with hostility as he demanded the woman step out of her car. She remained calm, but inside, her heart raced. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, yet the situation was escalating for no reason. Her husband, sitting in the car behind, watched intently. As an FBI agent, he had seen power abused before, but witnessing it happen to his wife struck a nerve he couldn't ignore. The cop's demeanor became more aggressive, his accusations baseless. He seemed determined to provoke a reaction, but the woman held her composure, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Meanwhile, her husband discreetly began recording, capturing every word and action. He had already started piecing together a troubling picture, noticing details that most people might miss, patterns in the officer's behavior that hinted at something much bigger. Little did the cop know, his worst secret was about to surface. As the confrontation continued, the officer's aggressive tone drew the attention of a small crowd nearby. The woman, now standing outside her car, kept her voice steady as she calmly asked why she was being treated this way. But her question only seemed to fuel the officer's temper. Her husband, still recording from his car, noticed something odd, a badge number he had seen before in complaints filed against certain officers. He had a gut feeling this wasn't the cop's first time crossing the line. In the background, whispers from bystanders grew louder. Some recorded the scene on their phones, while others voiced their discomfort with what they were witnessing. The officer, however, seemed unfazed, as if he was used to getting away with his actions. What he didn't realize was that his every move was being documented by someone who knew exactly how to bring the truth to light. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. The officer's voice grew louder, his commands more forceful, as if trying to assert dominance. The woman stood firm, refusing to back down, her quiet strength shining through. Her husband's grip on his phone tightened as he captured every detail, his FBI training kicking in. He knew that one wrong move could escalate things further, but he also knew he couldn't let this go. The officer suddenly reached for his radio, calling for backup. The woman's husband recognized the tactic, an attempt to intimidate her and justify the officer's actions, but he wasn't about to let that happen. He quickly sent the footage he had recorded to a trusted colleague, ensuring there was no chance of it being erased or buried. As the sirens of approaching police cars grew louder, the crowd began to grow restless. Whispers turned into murmurs of outrage, and tension filled every corner of the street. The woman's husband stepped out of his car, his FBI credentials ready in hand, but he waited, watching carefully, calculating the perfect moment to intervene. He knew this wasn't just about his wife. It was about exposing a system that allowed people like this officer to thrive unchecked. Just as the backup officers arrived, the woman's husband made his move. He calmly approached, holding his badge up for everyone to see. The crowd fell silent, their attention shifting to him. The officer froze for a moment, his confident demeanor cracking. "I'm Agent Carter," the husband said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension, "and I've been recording everything." The officer's face paled, but he quickly recovered, dismissing the husband's presence as irrelevant. "Stay out of this," he barked, but his voice lacked its earlier force. Agent Carter, however, didn't back down. "I know who you are," he said, his tone steady. And I know what you've been hiding. The officer's hand twitched toward his belt, but before he could act, one of the newly arrived officers stepped forward, recognizing Carter. "What's going on here?" the backup officer asked, his eyes narrowing as he glanced between the cop and the FBI agent. The tension shifted again, but this time it wasn't just the woman and her husband feeling the pressure. The officer at the center of it all looked visibly nervous now, as if he knew his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. But just as it seemed the situation might be turning, a new voice cut through the chaos. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Check the files on him. He's been doing this for years." All eyes turned to a man holding a folder, stepping forward with what appeared to be damning evidence. Agent Carter's instincts kicked in. This was bigger than he thought, and the stakes had just been raised. The crowd held its breath as the man handed the folder to Agent Carter. Inside were copies of complaints, reports, and even witness statements, all pointing to a pattern of abuse and corruption tied to the officer. Carter flipped through the pages quickly, his trained eyes catching every incriminating detail. He looked up, locking eyes with the officer, whose confidence had now completely dissolved. "You've been targeting people like her for years," Carter said, his voice firm. "But this time, you picked the wrong person." The backup officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them stepped forward, taking the folder from Carter and skimming through it. "Is this true?" he asked, turning to the accused officer. But the man had no words, only a defiant glare that masked his panic. Before anyone could react further, the officer made a sudden move, bolting toward his patrol car. The crowd gasped, and for a moment, chaos erupted. But Carter was faster. He tackled the man to the ground, pinning him as the backup officers rushed to assist. The officer was cuffed and placed in the back of a squad car, his days of unchecked power finally over. As the crowd cheered, Carter turned to his wife, who stood tall despite everything she had endured. But just as they began to feel relief, one of the backup officers approached with a grave expression. "Agent Carter," he said, holding up another file found in the officer's car. "This isn't over. There's more to this story than we thought." Carter took the file, flipping it open to reveal names, connections, and evidence of a much larger network of corruption. The story wasn't just about one bad cop. It was the tip of an iceberg that could shake the entire system. Agent Carter stared at the file, the weight of its contents sinking in. It wasn't just about his wife or even the officer. It was about a system that had allowed corruption to grow unchecked. But this time, things would be different. With the evidence now in trusted hands, an investigation was launched, uncovering a network of misconduct that stretched far beyond the local department. The officer at the center of it all faced multiple charges, and his victims finally found their voices heard. The woman, whose courage sparked the chain of events, became a symbol of resilience and the power of standing up for what's right. As for Carter, he knew this was just the beginning of a larger fight, but he and his wife were ready to face it together. Justice had been served that day, but the story was a reminder. Real change begins when people refuse to stay silent.